Okay, last presentation, Dr. Jeff Kaizen. He'll be presenting on state of preparedness for FAD preparedness and prevention in Iowa. Dr. Kaizen serves as state veterinarian at the Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship. He joined the department in 2013 and served as the assistant state veterinarian for 6 years before he was promoted to state vet. Dr. Kaizen works with federal, state, and industry partners to protect the health of Iowa's livestock industry and develop foreign animal disease response plans. Dr. Kaizen earned his bachelor's degree in animal science at Iowa State University in 1989 and graduated from Iowa State University's College of Veterinary Medicine in 1993. So if you would, let's go ahead and welcome Dr. Kaizen.
Thank you. I think you just had a little state of the state with your last discussions and questions, so there was a lot of good points that came out there. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'll offer as we go through this, it's probably late in the day if you want to have questions as we go, and because I may go long, I may go short, and we may hit the lightning round. So, and I'll also apologize. I'm sure Dr. Scheer gave you an update earlier. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my experiences in the DR, so I apologize if I've repeated some stuff, but I once heard a farm broadcaster here for WHO talk about when he went and heard Orion Samuelson give a talk. Several years later, he heard Orion Samuelson give the same talk, and he went up to him afterwards and he asked him, he says, well, wasn't that the same talk you gave? And he said, yes, it's easier to find a new audience than it is to give a new talk. So if some of I've heard. So a little bit of the overview of what we're going to talk about today is, I think, in order to get a status or state of the state, a status around the world, I'm going to give you a little bit of my experiences in the DR, and what I want to do there is kind of tie it to some of the things that we're doing and the importance in planning. Give you a few things from some of our recent avian influenza experiences and that apply. I'll touch really quick on the IFAD program, what Dr. Rodemaker mentioned that we're getting ready to, we launched it several years ago, but some of the things it ties to certified sampler, status today, and a summary. So we did a webinar several years ago, and Center for Food Security helped us with this graphic, but it shows the spread of ASF around the world. I like it because it's a pretty neat graphic, but the first slide here shows the movement of ASF in South America and then the spread to Spain and Portugal. So it starts in the early 1920s and ends up at, I believe, 1960. And the point, and remember Spain and Portugal as we go through the next slides. And if you remember in the 1970s when the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Cuba had ASF when it was introduced there. Then if you see where we start at in this slide, Spain and Portugal have ASF, but they did get rid of it. But remember, it took them over 30 years to get rid of ASF. And then you see the spread in Russia, Western Russia, Eastern Europe. And we end with, on this one, I believe, China. And as it spreads through Asia. And then again, the most recent introduction back to Haiti and the DR. The point and why I wanted to mention that, again, it's not because it was really neat graphics to show you, but that was part of it. But ASF are moving around the world. If you've watched the movement, when countries become infected, they have it for years. And what we need to be prepared for, and whether we're given the opportunity, if we have a period to stamp out and eradicate the disease if it's introduced in the United States. Because if you don't seize that opportunity, and I think you've heard today discussions in the past, it looks like other diseases we have, one thing with avian influenza, when it gets into a site, birds die. It's pretty obvious. But with ASF, it gets into a site that has PRRS or salmonella and we don't pick it up. And the way the swine industry is integrated, if it gets well beyond us or way past us, we may not have that window. So we want to make sure we're ready for that and prevent that it gets a foothold for years. So a little bit of my experience in the DR, and I do greatly appreciate the opportunity to go. For me, it was a great experience, both personally and I think for the state of Iowa, for the things I saw. The experience is there. But if you think about it, you know, the DR got rid of ASF years ago, and you could say, why doesn't that just happen immediately now? There's several things that you have to think about and understand what's going on in the DR, and looking at the island, thinking about it from a biosecurity and biocontainment standpoint. And that's a lot of the things that the USDA has been doing, looking at it and understanding all of the connections around the world. The DR has 7 international airports. I didn't realize that. So if you start thinking about that, the amount of travel that goes in there on a regular basis, 4 major seaports. So when you talk about travel, and a lot of the reasons why there's so many airports is all of the resort destinations. And if you start, and even while I was there, some of our neighbors from back home were there. One of the seed corn companies was rotating people from of their dealers going in and out. About 1,000 people they had rotated in and out of there in a short amount of time. So a lot of travel, a lot of connections there. When you start talking about how it got there, the other connections, the amount of relief work that happens, especially in Haiti, the people that travel from foreign countries going in there. And when you think back to the maps of where some of those people are coming from, the international airports, you know, dumping food out and going to landfills and garbage feeding, things we need to think about in the United States, garbage feeding, the relief work and people taking food with them and the chances of getting there. So the USDA was thinking a lot about, you know, looking at the island from a biocontainment standpoint to protect the United States, what mechanisms could be put in place there, but all starting to think about biosecurity and how to make sure that if there is eradication effort, you don't want it to become reinfected. Was infected in the 70s and went for a period of time and then became infected again. So a lot of those short-term and long-term goals. I'm going to show you some pictures here and talking about, and Dr. Scheer, this is the first time I've shown some of these pictures, so I hope they're all okay to share.
Looks like they are now.
So when you start talking about biosecurity and things we need to keep in mind, you know, I guess step back. A lot of times in the last several years when we give these talks and talk about African swine fever, we talk about keeping it in foreign countries, checking it at the border, and checking it at your farm. And, you know, I hope the things and as we go through this, some of the things I hope you take home from this experience was we have some control in foreign countries, but it's very difficult. What we need to be really focusing on is making sure we're watching our borders, and most importantly, what we always stress is to producers, it has to get on a farm and get into pigs in the United States, so that importance you have in biosecurity on the farms. This picture I thought was interesting. One of the things that was reported that in the DR, a lot of feed that goes into gestation, into farrowing, is bagged feed. Bagged feed going, I have no idea if this truck was bagged feed for lactation, but the point was they reported a lot of their feed goes in bags, and thinking about biosecurity, how that happens. And now if you can see, there's also a guy on the top of this truck riding. That was one of the things that absolutely amazed me was people riding on top of trucks going down the roads. Another example, these bags aren't quite as clean, you know, and the thing about biosecurity and how you disinfect things when they go across the clean and dirty line, and more people riding on the trucks. So some of the other big issues, I titled it socioeconomic, but so I went the end of January and spent 3 weeks, and part of the reason why I went for 3 weeks and we committed from the state of Iowa and myself, because you have to keep in mind I was lambing at the same time, so my son that was a senior in high school at the time lambed all of our sheep, but we committed to 3 weeks. So when we ask for the USDA to come and spend time in the state, if we have a disease outbreak, they generally come for 3-week tours. And actually this time during avian influenza, because it was so widespread across the United States, they were extending their tours out to 4 weeks. So I committed for at least 3 weeks, and it went very fast, and I do wish I would have stayed the 4th week, because the 4th week, the group went over to Haiti, and I wish I would have had that experience. But the trip I was on, one of the first meetings was with the chief veterinary officer of the Dominican Republic. And when we got there, one of the first things he showed us was a health bulletin that it came from Haiti. And in that health bulletin, it described how they were having a cutaneous anthrax outbreak. And in that bulletin, it warned that make sure that you didn't let children nurse on the mammary glands of animals. And for me, that was one of the first things that hit home of why it's going to be very difficult to control ASF in Haiti and the DR, is they have a lot of other major issues beyond worrying about ASF and controlling it. So I'm just trying to give you an idea of a lot of the issues going on. Livelihood in pork in Haiti, their production system is people own 2 or 3 or very few pigs. And that's their bank account, that's their livelihood. So even getting out into a country and starting to understand where disease is, but that's a major part of their lives. I'm sure you've heard Dr. Scheer say how difficult it also was just to go over to Haiti and meet with the chief veterinary officer and even talk about how it would be controlled in the country. So some of this is, some other meetings have been had, but, some of those difficulties. In the Dominican Republic, pork is one of their major staples, and they truly love pork. I don't think there was a time while I was there and breakfast in the mornings, there wasn't pork out on the counter. There was, Dr. Scheer's mentioned that at the end of the year, they didn't really want to do anything moving forward in doing something with ASF because Christmas is coming up and pork, but that's one of the reasons is it means a lot to them. One of the other things there was a lot of things, I guess, I learned there, but the government structure, and the reason I mention it's a little bit different than our government structure and how it functions, but they have a president and they have sub-factions of political parties. In order to get elected, you have to get some support, and after you're elected, there's ministries of agriculture and how people are appointed, and not the same sub-faction of your party, but I guess the point I'm making is it's not one unified structure. And even within that structure, when it gets to the Ministry of Agriculture, and within that structure, the chief veterinary officer has certain roles, and I don't remember exactly, but they have control over mass depopulation testing, but another branch has authority over cleanup of the sites and disposal, and please correct me if I'm remembering things wrong, Dr. Scheer, but it's not a unified structure. So that was one of the reasons why the USDA was spending a lot of time in setting up an incident command structure, which is what we operate under in a disease outbreak, a unified structure with the USDA to make a focused effort to work on the disease. And that was one of the efforts that the USDA was working on when I was there to set that up. So there was a focus on working on ASF. One of the other challenges USDA has is working through is indemnity. When you go into a foreign country and you're offering money for indemnity but have no regulatory authority, that also creates challenges on how you implement it and also making sure it gets to the right places. So there was a lot of work being done there. This was a picture I took when we were going down the road. I mean, the Dominican Republic has anywhere also from backyard pigs to, I'll show you Haitian camp, to modern agriculture, modern production, farms of 1900. It was reported they have a sow farm that has 10,000 sows on it, so a wide range of production. One of the field trips we took, we went to the north end of the island to look at some farms. The chief veterinary officer wanted to take us there. So I don't know if you remember, Dr. Scheer, when we stopped. On the way, we stopped to go to the bathroom, and this was a gas station. When we went in, there was no running water in the bathroom. We were also looking for a place to eat, so when we realized there wasn't any running water, we decided it wasn't probably the best place to eat. When we came out, this wasn't the first place. I have never seen so many pistol grip shotguns in my life. Outside of the motel we stayed at, there was a guard that sat and watched the parking lot every day, and he also had a pistol grip shotgun. But when we came out, this gentleman was standing watch over the gas pumps with a pistol grip shotgun. So I guess I'm just trying to give you a flavor of all the things that they're dealing with and issues, and also some of the other issues, infrastructure. The chief veterinary officer, I was surprised at the field staff they have for district veterinary, for essentially like what we have in Iowa for veterinarians, but reported that a lot of their vehicles were out in for repairs and didn't have ways to get around. The one picture here is a motorcycle. This was one of the ways their veterinarians got around was motorcycles. So, if you start thinking about carrying supplies to go do testing or get to the field to do resources, that's one of their limitations. One of the things the USDA was working on is making sure the lab had ways to make sure the testing was accurate, rotating staff from both Plum Island and here in Ames, NVSL, putting staff in the lab to make sure the testing was done properly, looking at ways they could help the lab in other ways, IT structure, and making sure, because I guess what I'm also hopefully getting across, we've got some great things already in place in the United States, but we'll touch on when I go through kind of a timeline for avian influenza and some of the things that happen. We have a lot of great things in place, but we are not ready today for a lot of things if AFSF happens tomorrow. A lot of discussions with the government about plan for depopulation and disposal. One of the other things that the Dominican Republic didn't have was a good surveillance system that ties back to the lab and coordinating all that testing, but how to surveil in the field, where farms are, getting that testing done. Another issue that came up, and I'll show you a checkpoint here, but what are the permit requirements? And one of the things that, as of today, we do not have identified all of those permit testing requirements that we need for ASF if it happens tomorrow. And that was one of the things, and I guess one of the other things I hope you take home, the last day to do foreign animal disease planning for any type of an outbreak is the day before it happens. Because you cannot do it the time the outbreak happens. So, permitting requirements, they were working on some of those, and the surveillance testing and coordinating what was happening in the field just to figure out where disease is at and where it's not. This was when we went on that road trip going north on the island. This is one of those checkpoints. And when we had the discussion with the chief veterinary officer and those permit requirements I just mentioned, in the discussion they mentioned that when they were doing testing to move animals, they would allow movements for 21 days after the testing was done. So if any of you are familiar, when we start talking about, in avian influenza, we require testing 24 and 48 hours before some of the movements happen. And no permitted movement is a guarantee that you're not going to spread disease. Unless you test every animal up the truck when it goes on and ensure that they're not spreading disease, we have to accept some level of risk. But in this case, you might argue there's a little bit more risk being accepted than maybe what should be. They were also go out and check the trucks, disinfecting the tires. But when you start thinking about, and when we do permitted movements, we want to make sure in the United States, especially in Iowa, when we do that permit to allow it to move, we're doing everything we can to make it safe before it leaves the farm. Because once it gets on the road, even though if you stop and disinfect tires on trucks as they're going down the road, that's not doing anything for the manure on the inside of the truck or what those pigs are carrying. So it was just a good reminder there of what we need to continue to think about here. Again, I don't think I have it. So and that was the closest I ever was to any live pigs while I was there. So as we went up north on the island too, we also stopped at a cattle show. And there's some pictures here, and it was a good experience. So DR also has TB. I wonder you remember that. So they have to go through an extensive testing protocol just to take animals to exhibitions. But if you'll notice on some of these animals, they commented that their dairy animals would produce a lot more milk if they had more water. So, it's also some of the other challenges. The other thing, so I don't know if I didn't point it out, one of those other slides where I pointed out, I don't even remember what I pointed out, but there's a helicopter on that. So while we're at this exhibition, this helicopter lands on the side of the hill. So you've got cattle that are short on water, would produce more milk, but you have one of the donors of the show up in a helicopter and land. And just the differences between money and no money and and some of the issues there on the island. I took this picture, so any of you know the Iowa State Fair. I haven't shown it to Gary Slater yet, the CEO, but this was a bench at this exhibition, and they made it out of pallets. So if the Iowa State Fair ever gets tough on money and they need extra money to make to benches, they can make it out of pallets. So this one was when we went on farther on this trip, we stopped at a Haitian camp, and right here in the front of the picture is the chief veterinary officer for the Dominican Republic, Rafael Nunez. And he wanted to show us several sites where the first outbreaks of ASF had occurred. And this was a Haitian camp that was roughly 30 miles from the border. And what I just want to point out here is some of the issues, what was described to us as the border and the checkpoints of things crossing the border. But Haitians, and if you can see in this picture behind Dr. Scheer, that's their clothes washing machine. And they're washing their clothes. But right next to it is a drainage ditch. And I'm going to show you some other pictures. And even in the background there, that's their houses on the other side. And on the back side of those houses is another drainage ditch. So straight across, I was careful when I took this picture. And the person straight across there, when we stopped, he gave us, one of the worst looks I'd ever seen in my life. When you talk about people burning holes in you. So I made sure he wasn't looking when I took the picture. But we found out later on, the government had said that they would bring him goats to raise in the interim while they didn't have pigs, and they hadn't brought him goats yet. So I think that was one of the concerns they had. But again, on the backside there, so this was the facilities where they raised their pigs. These were buildings where they were finishing their pigs. And on the backside of that is that same drainage ditch where their houses were. And you can see on the front side is the other drainage ditch where they were nearby, where they were doing their laundry. They raised roughly, I think it was about just short of 200 pigs is what they had. And when they first had ASF, it killed just about all the pigs before it got reported. So again, just another one of those pictures with the drainage ditches. These were similar housing facilities, but this was a 300-head commercial sow farm that had been depopulated and died. But it's the same thing. They had a building where they had some crates in them, but these are the buildings where they raised their pigs. Same story. On the back side of that's a drainage ditch. So I hope you're also getting an idea of some of the other challenges will be to clean up ASF and some of the issues with just drainage ditches. One of the towns we drove through, a lot of the houses had hoses that came out and pumped everything out of their houses into the gutters on the street. So a lot of issues. Where do you think this picture was taken? Yep, it was a dump on the north side of Santo Domingo. The reason we'd stopped there is one of the prior visits USDA had visited and went there was they had pigs in the landfill. So the issues of garbage feeding and whether that's the way it got started with international airports and garbage feeding or not. But the government had stopped, or at least here there was no pigs any longer. But for me, another one of those take-home messages, I'd never seen cattle or goats in a landfill before. And if you look, the body condition, it's hard to tell in the pictures, but their body condition was actually better than some of those animals at the exhibition. So one of the last things I'll mention with the DR before I give you a little example from avian influenza. Dr. Scheer did give us a few hours off every now and then while we were there. We'd taken a trip to the north end of the island one day and got up early, and this was a convenience store we stopped at. And this was in the parking lot. And the DR still has avian influenza. So some of those issues of how do you control disease, there was ducks, they walked right up to us, or they were feeding them, but it's just amazing in fact, the chief veterinary officer's office is essentially where their state fairgrounds are, and there was birds all over on the fairgrounds there when we went to visit them, so this is the tilt where I'm shifting gears on you a little bit here. Some of our recent experiences in avian influenza in Iowa, producers, so I think some of the keys to success, what we saw here in Iowa this time. Producers' awareness, Obviously, we had avian influenza in 2015, and I think there were a lot of producers that were prepared and remembered a lot of things that happened. So they had done a lot of planning and were prepared. We weren't the first state that had it. So if they hadn't got ready, they got ready and put biosecurity in place if it wasn't. One of the other things, that lesson we learned from 2015 is mass depopulation has to happen very quickly. And I don't think, so all of our sites in Iowa, for the most part, with the exception of a few of the large layers that probably took up to 7 days to mass depopulate, most all of the other sites were done within 24, 36 hours. And that was one of the keys to stop the spread. And I don't be thinking about, you know, are we ready today in the swine industry that we could execute that?
Do you mind if I ask what method
Sure.
you typically use?
Absolutely. So the two methods in Iowa that were utilized was foaming. A lot of the turkey sites, no, I'm not going to say a lot. There were several turkey sites that used ventilation shutdown plus. And what that is, shutting the ventilation down and adding heat. Some of the turkey sites used VSD plus, and a lot of the large layers, the layer facility used ventilation shutdown plus. So there is a key difference there in where we're at in equipment and readiness in the swine industry, but that was what was used. One of the things that tremendously helps us is electronic communication. Dr. Rademacher mentioned control areas, and when we start setting up control areas, drawing those circles, if we can communicate very quickly with producers, that helps us out a bunch. So watch time. Surveillance testing, we were very aggressive in Iowa. We worked with the USDA early on. We went above and beyond the Red Book on the surveillance testing we did. In fact, the first 8 days in a control area, we tested every other day all of those sites around infected premise. And there were a few times that we actually picked up, there's, I believe, 2 instances we picked up a site that was breaking before there was actual clinical signs on the surveillance testing. The timeline here, I want to just step you through, and this is where I apologize if some of you heard me at the Pork Expo, but give you an example of what we did during avian influenza when we got the call. One of the sites that we got a call on it was a Sunday morning. Got home from church and got a call with clinical signs. The veterinarian called, said he'd been at the site. It was a veterinarian that saw it in 2015, so when he called and described what was going on, had a high level of confidence that it truly was avian influenza. So as soon as we got off the phone with him, the first call was to NVSL. The great opportunity we have in Iowa, the confirmatory lab for avian influenza is NVSL. So asked them if we could take samples directly there, so worked with the producer. They started driving samples to NVSL. So again, that was about 11 o'clock. Got on the phone with the rest of our staff. We all mobilized, headed to the Department of Agriculture. And the next things we started doing in that time frame before we even had a positive result is some of our staff started working in EMERS, looking where the infected premise was, and they drew the circle around that infected premise, and they pulled out all of those sites that were in that control area. So we were making sure that we were ready when we had that, we were fairly confident it's going to be a positive result, that we were ready to send out notice to all of those premises in that control area that they were quarantined. The other thing we started doing, working with that producer on, is, and Dr. Petersburg sitting here, and he started working with the producer right away on the indemnity paperwork, because there's a lot of steps that had to happen for that to be done. Questions, sizes of buildings, calculations. But Dr. Petersburg worked with them, and by the time we had the diagnosis, the indemnity paperwork was ready to submit to the USDA, so we could start moving quickly on mass depopulation. The other thing we had to do, that if we wanted to do ventilation shutdown plus, we had to submit in writing to the USDA to make sure the producer was going to be eligible for indemnity and that there wasn't going to be any problems there. We had to submit in writing why we wanted to use ventilation shutdown plus and the reasons behind it. So we also had all of that paperwork ready to submit. Trying to make sure I remember everything else. So by about 4:15 that afternoon, when we got positive results back from NVSL, we were ready to submit all of that information. and start further working with the producer. And at the same time, what the producer was doing, that's one of the things I was remembering. The producer was getting ready and they wanted to do ventilation shutdown plus because they felt they could accomplish it. And one of the things that we made sure in all of the sites, if they did ventilation shutdown plus, we either had a state veterinarian or a federal veterinarian on site to make sure it was executed properly. Because if it couldn't get executed properly, we stopped them and didn't allow them to continue.
Quick question. Who provided the heaters to add the heat to the barns? Did the producers have that, or where did those come from? And then how did you dispose of the birds? Did you compost? Did you bury? What did you do?
Sure. So wasn't one of the first sites, one of the early sites, we actually went, the Department of Agriculture, and rented some heaters. But through that experience, it was, the type of heater wasn't the one that worked well. So all other cases, the producers had either their own heaters or they rented heaters, and we let them, they were prepared and had the heaters or knew their buildings. And part of the example there is producers know their buildings as well as anybody, what they can do and can't do. We provided resources. Dr. Gates here at ISU had some of Hong Wei's information, and if a producer needed help, we would point them in that direction. The two ways disposal happened in Iowa was composting or burial. So at 4:15, 4:30, we had all of those things in place, submitted the indemnity paperwork, got it back, but the end of the story is by the next morning at 11 o'clock, they had mass depopulated all the turkeys on that site. It was a 5-barn site. So there were a few challenges through the night, and we worked with them. If they had questions, we answered. Dr. Petersburg and I were on a call with them at 3 in the morning, stepping through some of the questions. And we had two people. We had one of the federal VMOs out on the road on the clean side, and one of our district veterinarians on the inside on the dirty side. But I guess what I'm trying to express and convey is the timeliness of how all of this happened, and where we're at in the swine industry and making sure we're prepared. Was mentioned IFAD, where we kind of taken a little break, but what we want to make sure, as has been mentioned, veterinarians working with certified samplers, but also, the one thing I forgot when I mentioned, the other thing that we were working with the producer in that time from the positive diagnosis was the epidemiology on the farm. We were asking them questions on what moved on and off your farm recently. So what we were doing was identifying, and actually from this site, we identified some other sites that were contact premises that we actually issued quarantines to because they weren't in the control area. So the point, it's critical, accredited veterinarians that they work with producers regularly. They understand the farm's biosecurity better than anybody else besides the producer. The epidemiology, because we start to run very quickly short on our staff, both at the state level and federal level, and even during this avian influenza outbreak, the number of states that were involved, we have to be able to expand our resources very quickly, and accredited veterinarians are one of those. One of the things we want to focus on with a certified sample collector, I'll give you a couple quick examples, even from avian influenza, that drives this home. It's critical that people get the right samples on the farm, that those people are also looking for disease on the farm, and those processes. We had one site that the producers, veterinarians, they collected all their own samples. There's no certified sample collector program for avian influenza right now. We had one case where when the samples were collected, after they collected them, they realized they hadn't done one of the steps correctly. So they went back and they corrected the issue, but they did it on the positive site first. They had a site with clinical signs. They did another site that didn't have clinical signs. They cross-contaminated their tubes. So when the tests were run, we had 2 sites that tested positive. But the veterinarian working with the producer and understanding there weren't clinical signs, and we asked the same question, this site doesn't have clinical signs. And we had other examples where we picked up sites early and several days later they had clinical signs, but the veterinarian working with the producer figured out what happened. So that's one of those key pieces. Another one of the examples, we had a testing problem, and we actually had a site test positive, and they had clinical signs. They'd been losing quite a few birds. And so the case definitions and the ability to depopulate a site was based on a positive test and clinical signs of avian influenza on the site. So what I hope you're picking up on, we had a site that we could have depopulated on the information we had. We didn't want to depopulate, and the veterinarian was saying there are not actually clinical signs of avian influenza on this farm. So it's just absolutely critical veterinarians working with producers. So just kind of wrapping up the status today, you know, we call this the triangle of triumph, turmoil, cooperation, but every side of the triangle has some work yet to do for us being prepared for ASF. You heard some of the discussions before I started and the questions of some of the programs that are coming up, but we all have work to do together and we need to keep doing that. One of those times we had a little time off, this was a boat that I took a picture of. And this is what happens. It's a bad day when you forget to put the plug in the boat. But I don't know if that's what happened here or not. The point is we don't have the plug in the boat. We've got some work to do, and we don't want the ship to sink. And the last one, Megan Orr, I'll give her credit. She came up with this graphic here, but we've got to understand: are we going to be provided the window to stamp out and eradicate ASF or any other foreign animal disease, and are we ready to take that opportunity to do it? So, I thank you. I mean, well, I do have a couple more slides here. We have done a lot of work in the past several years. We have a lot of resources on our website, our response plans, a lot of the webinar recordings. We've got a webinar that we did on control areas and permitting, so if you have more interest in that. We actually have a kind of a scenario-based workshop tomorrow that we're going to go through some of these things, but we have a lot of resources. There's links to other websites, the DNR, if you want to start thinking about disposal on a farm, whether you can bury, compost on site, but there's links there. We've got links to the USDA, the ASF Red Book, policy information, response tools. So, again, thank you, and that's what I have.
Hey. Just curious, when you were dealing with avian influenza and within the quarantine zone, when you were going to nearby farms to do the testing, did you have cooperation from the farmers? And is there state or federal rules that require them to allow you access, or did you run into any issues with being provided access?
Sure. So the testing that was done within the control area, the producers did that testing themselves. And I don't think this time we didn't have any problems with getting cooperation. Now, the control area is out to 10 kilometers, and well, part of the cooperation is we issue them quarantines. So we have the quarantine authority. But from 10 kilometers out to 20 is called the surveillance zone, and we do not issue quarantines in that area. But in the aid to help demonstrate to trading partners, foreign countries, in Iowa, we complied with the surveillance testing out to 20 kilometers, and we also had good compliance with that. So we were happy there in 2015, but we didn't go door-to-door testing. In 2015, we did do that, and for several weeks we had good compliance. By the third week, producers met us, backyards met us at the driveway with pitchforks and said, "You're not coming onto our premise." So we were very blessed that we had good cooperation this year.
I don't want to misquote my friend, Dr. Porth, but he asked a question, I think either of Chris or Al, whether we were ready for a foreign animal disease. And it makes me think about what Kate said in an earlier talk today, that this is not a sprint. This is a marathon, and we're never ready. We're never ready. We never should have the mindset that, okay, now we're ready and let it come, because we're ready. Because there's so much that in an outbreak that happens that has to be decided on the go, you know. But if we'd had this, if we went back 6-7 years ago and we had a meeting like this on foreign animal disease, we'd be talking about maybe vaccine for foot and mouth disease, and we talk about some programs that were up on the shelf. The difference today is that we've got producer groups, we've got federal, state organizations that are all working together, and we're making continuous improvement, but we're never going to be done.
And Dr. Hill, thank you. A lot of times I forget all of the work because there has been tremendous amounts of work done, and we do have a lot of things in place, and we're not going to start flat-footed. And there is, and a lot of times I'm one of the first to say, I mean, that triangle of cooperation that's happening, there is a lot of work being done on all sides there.
If we go downstairs, we can probably solve some more problems.
I'm for it.